Retired animal trainer Sam Russell looked at the brilliant digital wolf the young director showed him and simply smiled. "You've drawn a beautiful picture, son," he said, "but this isn't a wolf. This is the echo of a wolf. What do you think is the biggest difference between a master of the old school and a talent of the new generation?" The young director wanted him to control an animal, but Sam was about to teach him that you cannot control an animal. You can only make an agreement with it. The darkness wasn't the intimate dark of a movie theater, but the claustrophobic void of a creator's mind. The giant screen tore through that darkness with moving light and shadow. On the screen, a wolf was running on a snowy mountainside, under the silvery light of the full moon. Every single one of its hairs waved separately in the wind. The muscles that tensed as it ran were like a living example of an anatomy atlas. The snowflakes kicked up from under its paws floated in the air like crystal jewels. It was a technological masterpiece. It was perfect. But it was wrong. Robert Chalamet, the young and brilliant director, who was the only spectator in the darkness, leaned toward the console in front of him. "Stop," he whispered into the microphone. On the screen, the perfect wolf suddenly froze. Robert ran his hand through his hair. On his face was the frustration of a god faced with a single inexplicable flaw in the world he had created. "The eyes," he said, speaking into the darkness. "The eyes are still empty. There's nothing there. No weight, no danger, no soul. Give me something that's alive, damn it." From behind the control desk came the tired voice of the CGI animation chief. "Rob, we've been working on the eyes for the last 3 weeks. We've integrated the photorealistic data scans, the macro shots of real wolf eyes, everything. Physically, it can't get more realistic than this." "I don't care about physics, Mark," Robert shouted. "My film is not based on physics, it's based on emotion. And this thing, this $1 million puppet, it doesn't feel anything, and because it doesn't feel, it can't make you feel." Robert Chalamet was Hollywood's new golden boy. At 29, he had conquered the critics in the box office with the 2 films he had directed, and was considered a visual genius. His films were not just stories, but breathtaking, living paintings. And now, in the middle of his most ambitious project, The Spirit of the Mountain, he was drowning in the perfection he had created. The film told the story of a man who escapes civilization and befriends a wolf in the mountains. And the entire emotional weight of the film was on the shoulders of that wolf. If the wolf wasn't convincing, the film wouldn't be either. The studio executives were constantly reminding him of the increasing budget and the delayed schedule. For the first time in his life, Robert was losing control. He was a dictator who was used to controlling every frame, every beam of light, every color. But he couldn't control the soul of a digital character, not even with the most advanced software. One afternoon, at the height of his desperation, the film's old and experienced producer entered his room. He had a yellowed newspaper clipping in his hand. He said, "I have an idea, but you're not going to get mad at me." Robert didn't even look at him. "If you're going to suggest more rendering time or a new software update, the door is right there." The producer placed the newspaper clipping on the table. He said, "His name is Sam Russell. 15 years ago, do you remember the film Wild Blood? The performance of the bear in that film. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. This is the man who trained that bear." Robert looked at the clipping. On it was the photo of an old, weather-beaten man standing calmly next to a bear the size of a mountain. He said, "An animal trainer?" sarcastically. "What do you expect me to do? Are we going to wait for the mood of an animal in this day and age? The security problems, the delays, the unpredictability? No, Absolutely not. The producer said calmly, "That digital puppet of yours is predictably awful. This man has retired from the industry. He lives alone in the mountains. But maybe, just maybe, it's worth talking to him." Robert hated this idea. It was an insult to his vision, to his understanding of control. But then he looked again at the perfect wolf with the empty eyes on his screen, and he felt a cold despair inside him. He had nothing left to lose. A week later, Sam Russell stepped into that bright and artificial world, into the heart of Hollywood. He was a man in his 70s, wearing an old flannel shirt and a worn-out vest, his face kneaded by the sun and the wind. His arrival brought a tranquility to the sterile, bustling atmosphere of the studio, a tranquility that seemed to have come from another time, another world. Robert greeted him with the condescension of a king meeting an envoy. He took him to the huge, dark cinema hall and showed him the digital wolf on the screen, the one they had been working on for months. "Here," Robert said, a challenge in his voice. "This is our wolf. As you can see, it's perfect in every detail." Retired animal trainer Sam Russell looked at the perfect, soulless image on the screen for a long time. There was no admiration, no jealousy on his face, just the sad expression of an old doctor looking at a perfect anatomical drawing in a medical book.
Finally, he slowly turned to Robert and just smiled. "You've drawn a beautiful picture, son," he said. "But this isn't a wolf. This is the echo of a wolf." This sentence was a silent slap to all of Robert's technological arrogance. For the first time in his life, he was seeing someone who was not admiring his created perfection. "Well, what's your solution, wise man?" he asked, unable to hide his sarcasm. Sam's answer was simple: a real wolf. Robert and the men in suits from the studio's insurance company laughed out loud at this idea. "Impossible," Robert said. "Uncontrollable. Dangerous. Over budget." "You can't control an animal, that's right. You're not supposed to. You can only make an agreement with it, based on respect." Long, intense discussions ended with the intervention of the producer. Robert, making the biggest compromise of his life, reluctantly agreed to give a trial chance to Sam and his wolf, which he had worked with for years, a wolf he had rescued from a shelter in Alaska, a wolf that was half tame, but whose soul was still wild. When the wolf was brought to the set, the entire studio held its breath. It had no name. Sam just called it He. It was a huge, gray-furred, muscular animal, but what was truly impressive was not its size, but the weight of its presence. Its eyes were amber-colored, and in them it carried 1,000-year-old wisdom and an untamable spirit. It looked at the fake rocks, the giant lights, the bustling people around it, with the calm indifference of a king watching his gestures. On the first day of shooting, Robert tried to take back control. He took the megaphone. "All right, Sam, ask him to run toward that hill and stop at point A." Sam didn't answer. He was just sitting on the ground next to the wolf. "Sam, did you hear me?" Robert shouted. "He hears you, Director," he said calmly. "But he doesn't understand, because you're not speaking his language." The next few hours were a series of humiliations for Robert. He was giving commands to the wolf, making signs, even trying to lure it to a certain place with pieces of meat. But the wolf was not reacting to any of these artificial directions. It was just lying down, yawning, or looking at its owner, Sam, with indifference. Robert's unshakable obsession with control was being shattered by the silent, stubborn will of an animal. The shoots were a complete fiasco. At the end of the day, just as Robert was on the verge of canceling the project in anger, Sam approached him. "Give me 1 day," he said. "Just 1 day. Just me, he, and a camera operator. No one else. No lights, no sound, no megaphone. Just silence." In desperation, Robert accepted. The next morning, the huge studio was as silent as a ghost town. There were only Sam, the wolf, and a young operator who was setting up his camera with trembling hands. For hours, Sam did nothing. He sat silently with the wolf on the fake hill. They breathed together. They watched the surroundings together. Sam was waiting for the wolf to relax, to feel the artificial space as his home, to get used to the strange smells. Then he didn't try to make the wolf act the key scene that Robert wanted, that is, the wolf climbing the hill and howling. He just created the conditions for that scene to happen. He took a small resinous piece of pine tree from his pocket, which he had brought from the wolf's native lands. He checked the direction of the wind, and he rubbed that piece of resin on the very tip of the fake hill without anyone seeing. Then he stepped back and began to wait. An hour passed. 2. The wolf was motionless, and then something happened. The wind brought that familiar wild scent to the wolf's nose. The wolf lifted its head. He raised his nose to the air, and in his eyes there was a memory, a curiosity. He slowly stood up, and he slowly began to climb toward that scent, toward the fake hill.
He was not acting on a command, but on his own instinct. When he reached the top, he sniffed the surroundings, and then, as if calling out to his brothers in the mountains, he lifted his head to the sky and howled. This was not the sound of an actor imitating. This was a hair-raising, real howl from the depths of the heart, full of loneliness, power, and longing. Robert was watching this moment from a small monitor in the distance, holding his breath. He felt his eyes fill with tears. As a director, for the first time in his life, he was seeing the incredible power of not controlling but understanding and trusting. In that moment, it was not an echo, but the reality itself. After that day, the shooting process of the film changed completely. Robert put aside his megaphone and his detailed shot lists. Every day, he would pull his chair next to Sam and would silently wait to see what gift the wolf would give them that day. He was no longer directing the film. He was just recording the story that the wolf was telling in the most honest way. When the film was released, it was hailed as a masterpiece by the critics. Especially the performance of the wolf was praised as a realism and soul that CGI could never achieve. The film broke records at the box office. After the glorious premiere of the film, Robert escaped the bright lights of Hollywood and visited Sam at his modest home in the mountains. As they were sitting by the fire, the wolf was sleeping in the shadows. "What did you tell him, Sam? That day, on that hill, how did you convince him to howl?" Sam answered, looking at the fire. "I didn't tell him anything, son. I just listened to him, and I let him tell the story himself." On that day, Robert learned that the greatest art is not to imitate nature, but to create a silent and respectful space for it to express itself. And he learned that the greatest directing is sometimes not directing at all. For more stories like this about how a machine can create a perfect copy but never carry the weight of a soul, don't forget to subscribe to Unspoken Code Stories.